Now it is my great pleasure to introduce our guest today, Elizabeth Jarosz, a marketing researcher with Ipsos specializing in conducting focus groups, interpreting polls, and human insights. She also spent some time on a certain soon-to-be president again's TV show back in 2004, so we're hoping she can give us some human insights on what a second Trump term is likely to bring. Elizabeth Jarosz, welcome to the Get More Smarter podcast.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
So first, just tell us a little bit about yourself and what your work at Ipsos focuses on.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been doing market research for 25 years now, which sounds like a lot. It's starting to get embarrassing to say that, but I love it. I get to sort of go across the country and even the world. And sometimes I go into people's homes. Sometimes I'm just talking to them in focus groups, but I really get to understand their lives. I kind of call it like I get to crawl inside their minds a little bit. I like to dig and understand their values because that's really what shapes how they make decisions. And so at Ipsos, I get to do it across a wide variety of things. So like, one week I could be talking about video games with teenage boys, and next week it's, pizza with, stay-at-home moms, or finances with, sort of high net worth people or whatever. And this year I've really focused on the election. So I'm kind of using all those skills that I've sort of honed over the course of 25 years to really dig deep and understand how voters are feeling and how they're making decisions, in this election period.
Well, we've got lots of questions for you about that. But the first thing I want to bring up is that your work concentrates in part around something called neurometrics. Can you explain what that is for listeners and how it's used in market research or voter research?
Yeah, absolutely. So we don't always do it, but for some projects, it can be really helpful. I haven't done this yet, but for example, I want to do it when we talk about internalized sexism or racism. Okay, so just to sort of set that context. But what neurometrics is, there's a lot of different facets to it. Part of it is facial recognition, so facial coding. So I personally have been trained to kind of read people's faces. So, and so there's a whole science behind that. And now we can do it electronically. So if we record your face, like a computer can tell us, okay, you're happy here, you're anxious here, you're angry here, whatever, right? So like during the debate, for example, we tracked people's faces to see what they were really feeling, right? Another aspect of it is galvanic skin response, which I know these are really nerdy terms, but basically...
No, this is what we're here to talk about. This is great, yeah.
Okay. Basically, you like hook up something to someone's finger, and you can read, it's like a sweat response, a skin sweat response. So if you can imagine, like, if you're standing on the edge of a cliff, you might have more anxiety, right? And you might sweat a little bit, right? It's just like if you're watching a debate or something, even a commercial, right? And you might have like a strong feeling that would make your skin respond. So sometimes human beings aren't conscious of what they're really thinking and feeling. And so this is a way to kind of go to the subconscious and understand what's happening biologically. And then we can go back and we can sort of analyze or ask, what was really happening in these moments. And so it's a much deeper way and kind of sneaky way, if you will. I mean, not in a bad way, but sneaky way to get at what people are truly thinking and feeling that they don't know they're thinking and feeling.
So what, well, I guess we don't have the doohickeys on our fingers, but if we did, you could tell us what we were feeling right now?
I can so the doohickeys, they tell us that you have a response, but we don't know what that response is or what it means quite yet. So I could use facial recognition to help with that. I could use just, chatting with you and trying to dig deep and understand what the feelings were there.
So instead of just getting somebody's like actual verbal response and just interpreting from that, you have these other layers of data. So you have this facial recognition piece, you have this like heat or sweat response coming, and that gives you like additional insights into like the answer itself that they're giving?
Exactly. Yeah.
Huh. You were conducting voter research during the campaign for Ipsos. Did you notice any patterns and research in the run-up to the election that made you think maybe Trump was doing better than the polls indicated?
I'll be honest, about 30 to 45 days before the election, I turned to my friends and I said, the tide is turning. I can feel it. I can't tell you exactly what it was. I just know that when you interview so many people like I do over and over again, you can sort of intuitively feel where the pulse is. And I know, it might sound kind of weird, but that's what happens to me. So I knew about 30 to 45 days out that the tide had changed. I didn't know if it would change back. I didn't know, if I was making it up. Sometimes you don't trust yourself so much, because the polling was still sort of staying pretty steady, but my qualitative research felt different. So, there was a little bit more, I guess, enthusiasm when I was talking to Trump supporters. Some of the undecideds were still undecided, but they were starting to say different things like, RFK, this health thing, we really do need help with health. Like there'd be these little things that would sneak in that weren't sort of sneaking in before. And the enthusiasm for Kamala Harris felt a little bit less than the weeks prior, and so I was like, that's interesting. I wonder what's going to happen here. So yeah, a little bit.
We've joked a lot on the show about wondering how anyone could have been undecided in this election. Can you convince us that there is such a thing as an undecided voter?
Well, yeah, hopefully I can convince you. I convinced myself. I had the same sort of thought, right? And there were all those jokes and memes online, like how could you be undecided with these kind of two extremes, right? But I did a lot of interviews among undecided voters. And one of the big insights for me was these are people who really cared about their vote and weren't honest. Many of them didn't like either candidate. So it was sort of like, what am I going to give up? And they were undecided in what was more important to them to lose, if you will. Right. And so I understood that, and I had a lot of compassion for folks at that stage, and they were trying to take it seriously and make the right decision. And they didn't feel like there was a clear candidate that they were behind.
What do you think was part of what made people kind of break late for Donald Trump, right? Like you said, you felt this sort of tide turning in like the last 20 or 30 days of the election. Like, do you have any insight as to like what it was? There was this huge amount of enthusiasm that came out of the convention with Kamala Harris and Tim Walz and this sort of like new revitalized ticket. And I think we assumed that energy and enthusiasm would carry through. But you said you sensed something in your focus groups. Do you have any idea what that was attributed to?
Yeah, I think it's a few things. I mean, nobody knows for sure, right? But some of the things I can tell you popped up in my qualitative research were Kamala Harris, while she did a lot of things right in her campaign, she didn't fully answer some really important questions for especially some of the undecided voters who were kind of on the fence. So, a great example of this is immigration. Like she would say, I'm going to sign that bill, into law that Trump tanked, right? But she didn't give specifics. She didn't ever answer, that she wasn't the border czar, or that, like what she was really responsible for and what she believed in with regard to immigration, right? Like, her stance, right? For the economy, she did a little bit, she talked about it a little bit. The people who don't watch, I'll call it liberal-leaning media or even mainstream media, never heard that message because it wasn't coming out in the other silos of the conservative or even some of the social media spaces. So they didn't know her economic messages, and those messages weren't getting through. She also didn't answer the question fully how she would be different than Biden, and that was a big one. And honestly, probably should have been one of the first questions that they prepped her on that she was ready for. So when she went on The View and she said, I can't think of anything I would do differently, it was a big deal, And
part of the whole point is like you have this new ticket now and you have this new opportunity to like reset the conversation, and to not have an answer other than I can't think of anything I would do differently, like just throws that whole advantage away.
Well, yes, and even more importantly than that, Biden's approval rating was 37%. And most people thought the country was going in the wrong direction. Right? So you can't say, I'm going to not change anything, right? And sort of have enthusiasm behind you. So that was on the Harris side. On the Trump side, he started to go on a lot of the social media, spaces. I don't know how much that will impact things, but, when you go on Joe Rogan, you get 34 million folks, that's a big deal. He's more of an enigma, to be honest. So if I just look at it through the voters' lens, there were a lot of voters who don't like him personally, but looked past that for things like the economy and immigration in particular. So, he was winning on some of the major issues that the country is facing. The perception was that he would be better for some of those issues. And for some of these undecided voters, it came down to this as something as simple as, I felt better under Donald Trump's administration than I do right now. And they would point to things like the prices of food or gas or housing when they were thinking about that, So economically, if you look factually, the U.S. is doing well, and from an economic standpoint. If you look at us relative to the rest of the globe, we're the envy of the world post-COVID. Like, we're the economy that's done the best, right? But a lot of people don't have that context, or they just know what they feel every day, right? And that is pinched. And when they kept saying that to the Biden administration, this is before Harris even, but when they were saying, the economy's not good, the Biden administration's response was, yes, it is. Look at these numbers.
Yeah, we thought that was nuts.
So the voters didn't feel heard. That's a problem, right? So she came into that, right, and inherited that and didn't say how she would be different. So you got that. And one last point, I think the abortion conversation is really important. I interviewed a lot of women who were conservative by nature, wanted to vote for the conservative ticket, but were extremely conflicted because they also believed that women should have bodily autonomy and some level of choice. The level ranged in terms of how much choice they wanted, but they were conflicted on this issue. And I thought that would become a bigger issue, but the more I started thinking about it, some of the states with the strictest abortion bans weren't the swing states. In states where abortion was on the ballot, women could choose to vote one way for abortion and the other way for the president. So it freed them up to vote conservative if they were having that conflict.
Right.
I was really worried about that it backfired essentially on the top of the ticket, because voters were able to say okay, I can have my cake and eat it too. I'll vote for the guy who I think did the economy better, and I get to protect abortion rights. Win-win.
Yep. I think that's very much what happened in some states.
One thing that our industry is a little bit twisted around on is that they tend to put a lot more emphasis on quantitative research, so representative samples and polls, than they do on qualitative research, like the kind of stuff you're talking about, focus groups and conversations and journaling and things like that. How do you think candidates and campaigns can use focus groups better to inform their strategies?
So the way that I explain it is like this. First of all, quantitative research is important. I mean, that's the numbers. And if done well, it can really help you understand what's happening, right, on a big scale. Qualitative research gives you the why behind the numbers. So that's what I was trying to do on my YouTube channel, which is still new and budding. But, that was sort of the vibe, right? It's like the poll is saying this, but why is it saying this? And so many people were like, how could this be happening, when we would have a poll number come out, right? And that's where someone like me comes in, right? So I can figure out why, what's behind it? What are people thinking? What are they feeling? What's in their heads when they're answering that question, So I think qualitative could be used so much more to give the context behind things,
On the other side of that, I see campaigns doing what I call death by focus groups sometimes, where an issue or a candidate campaign gets so lost in the results that they end up with a message that is watered down and virtually meaningless. How do you avoid that?
Well, I haven't come across that so much in my world, but I think it's also the way that you do the qualitative. It's just like anything. You can manipulate numbers. You can manipulate qualitative. You can take quotes out of context. You can just cherry pick some quotes, right? And you really have to have the earnest sort of intent to get to the bottom of what people are really thinking and feeling. What do they need Like, messages all come from what someone needs. It's a human need, right? And you kind of can't go wrong if you understand the need and you address the need. Now, some people may not like how you're addressing it, but they'll like that you're addressing the need, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think there are different ways to do qualitative research. Some of the stuff you see on TV where I love reporters and I think the news is really important, but they're not really doing traditional qualitative when they have like one focus group of 6 people for 10 minutes. Right. You know what I mean? Like that's not really getting to the bottom of whatever they're talking about. It is good TV and it is some context, but you can't take it as like a finding, right? You can just take it as a few of these people said this.
Like
it may not even sync up to what the polls say. You know what I mean? It's not representative. So I try to do sort of more, rigorous qualitative research, I guess, so I could get to the bottom of what the true thing is and then sort of talk about that.
So switching gears, back in 2016, you started doing a social experiment you called Behind the Glass, where, among other things, you had groups of Trump supporters and groups of, like, recent immigrants to the U.S. essentially watch you conduct focus groups with the other group through, like, a one-way mirror. And then you started to try and, like, facilitate a way to heal the divide. Do you still think there's a way to bridge the gap between the left and the right in this country, considering all that's happened since 2016?
Yeah. That project is called Behind the Glass. It's totally my baby. That's where, my true heart, my true north lies. 100%, I believe that we can still heal the divide with a lot of the major issues of our time. I truly believe that, and I think because I believe that, there's a shot that when I do it, it might work. And the way through is really helping people see themselves in each other, which is actually, I think, somewhat easy to do, but I've been doing that for a long time. That project, I didn't know how it would go. I called it a social experiment. And I recruited Trump supporters and I recruited recent immigrants, many of which were undocumented immigrants. And the facility tried to cancel me because they thought there would be fights and they were trying to have like a security guard with a gun, that these two could come together, and I didn't know. I also have a degree in spiritual psychology, and so I sort of pulled in a bunch of sort of tricks and tools in my facilitation to sort of make sure people were on a similar wavelength and sort of facilitate a dialogue in such a way where it was almost like the anti-debate. I called it undebate, but the way that it worked was I did this actually over 2 days. The footage you'll see on YouTube is one of the days, but because I wanted to be rigorous about it, I didn't want to just let one group go first. So I flipped the order and did it twice. But essentially, I put Trump supporters in the front room of a focus group facility. I let undocumented immigrants or recent immigrants watch from behind the glass. They heard this conversation they've never heard before about themselves, right? Mm-hmm. And then I flipped it and let the other side watch. And then they got a full, learning about how that side felt. And I think there's something magical about that one-way mirror. So, you kind of forget people are watching you. It's a very real conversation. I did 2 hours with each group. I mean, it was a long day. And then I brought them together, and that's where really the magic started to happen. It was so tense when they walked in the room, and I did record what they were saying when they were watching Behind the Glass, and there was some nasty stuff from both sides, right? And then they come into the room, and it's like, and I'm there to sort of facilitate. And if you watch, it's like, I released this much later, so it doesn't have like a high view count or anything, but I think they're the best parts. Like it's called Heal the Divide Part 1 and Heal the Divide Part 2. That's really where I'm facilitating a lot. And you can sort of see we do this method of communication, and they really speak to each other. And in the end, they're like hugging each other and saying they're grateful to have met each other, and like the experiment worked, And so I firmly believe, I know it was a long-winded answer, but I firmly believe I can do that for like all the major issues and even some of the more minor issues of our time. Like when we were going through COVID, I'm like, wear a mask or not, that could be a behind the glass, and that's a smaller issue, abortion would be, or transgender, like those would be some of the bigger issues, that would be fun to tackle. I just need the funding to do it.
How would you move that sort of conversation to influence a broader population? Because obviously it's harder to do that when you add more people.
Yeah, I mean, I would still keep it small, and it would just become a model of like, here's how you can have constructive conversation. It could be a little beacon of hope. Like, wow, if those two can come together, maybe I can talk to my uncle on Thanksgiving, that sort of thing. And so I think just sort of people seeing it and getting it, who knows, what might happen. And then I would love, in my wildest dreams to sort of set up, a system where people could learn some of the tools and techniques themselves, so maybe teach some of those and have some coaches teaching them and stuff like that. It could be really fun.
It sounds like we could use the help. Switching gears again, so it's hard not to bring this up, but you were on the second season ever of The Apprentice back in 2004. Want to know sort of what it was like working with the soon-to-be 47th president during the show?
Yeah, well, that was a wild time. Okay, so it was a long time ago now, which is kind of crazy, but I think it was like in 2005 or something like that, when the second season happened. It was the second season, and this has nothing to do with me, but like the second season was the most watched season. So like season one did really good. Like, like Bill Rancic won and Omarosa was on that season, and it just sort of blew up, right? So 20 million people a week watched the show, right? So it was just a crazy thing to be a part of, right? Donald at that time was, sort of this larger than life character that, quite honestly, and this happens with all TV shows, it's not just for Donald Trump, like, the producers kind of spruced up a little bit, right? Sure. They made him look like even more successful, right? Because that's what's good for TV, and that was fine back then. And it was a game show, essentially, right? So everybody was sort of in that mindset. His personality, a lot of people ask me this, was he the same? I believe he was. I mean, the elements of what you see now were all there, all of those elements. And, we can talk more if you're interested, but I do think that they've gotten a little bit more, I guess I'll say extreme, the more the years kind of go by and the more power he has. And, so it's just sort of, a more extreme version of what he was then, but he's still very much the same person.
Does that experience that you had with him, did that influence your opinion of him as a politician?
A little bit. I don't usually give my opinions about where I land, because the work I do, it's really important for me to stay neutral. Sure. But it couldn't not influence it, right? Like, I'm a human being, so yeah, a little bit.
So you seem really concerned with the political divide and like the fissures in society and how people look at each other, and this is why your Healing the Divide stuff I think is so interesting and important. But let's face it, I mean, Donald Trump is a pretty divisive guy, right? It seems like he wins by kind of splitting the country up into groups and then pitting them against each other, and here we are again. Do you think that divide and conquer thing is part of why he won again in 2024?
I think fear is a big motivator, to be honest. I mean, in my research, it's one thing that motivates people, in terms of messaging. I think he wields that and he uses that. So yeah, I think it makes a difference. And when I interview folks that, and I'm going to keep saying this because the media silos we're in are really one of the major reasons we have the division we have in our country. Okay. So if you interview people who watch more liberal leaning media, they have a whole different universe of facts and opinions than if you interview people who are watching conservative, and like neither the two shall meet. Like, they're really different, disparate. And so I think, if you're in a more conservative leaning universe of media and you're hearing those things, that's what you believe is true. Those are your facts, right? And so it's not that there's anything bad or wrong with those folks. It's just that those are their facts, and they believe that certain people are, bad or wrong or out to get them, if that side is fear mongering. If the Democratic side started to fear monger even more, and they did a little bit actually in this election, people would believe that too on the other side. So I think it's definitely a motivator. Yeah, it probably affected how well he did.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, it's like how it feels like those fissures are getting bigger, the silos are getting harder, and you said nary the two shall meet. That is what appears to be happening. So like, since you can't do the big healing the divide focus group with every single person in America, like, how do you think we can move past this? Are we just going to end up in these harder and more distant silos, or is there something that can break the wall down and get us talking to each other again?
My hope is that, projects like mine and other projects can start sort of seeding the idea for folks that there is a way to do this. A lot of change starts from the bottom up. It always has. I know it's not sexy, but truly, you going to dinner at Thanksgiving with a relative that thinks very differently than you, and you being able to hold a space and have a conversation that's constructive and dare I say loving, right? When maybe your relationship has been adversarial up until then, makes a huge difference in your personal world, right? And if enough people start to do that, it will sort of start to crack open. Now, I do also believe that it would be helpful if we had some leaders, that could also sort of model that behavior and say that it's important. I think the people at their core really want that. I don't think they truly want to be hating the other side and be divided. I know that that's some of the behavior that's happening, and I know that people are caught up in that sometimes, but deep down when you talk to somebody, that's not genuinely humanity, and you can see that when like a tragedy happens and someone just like instantly helps another human being, right? And it's like, that's the true essence of who we are in our humanity. And so it's just sort of people getting back to that and sort of being able to sort of, I don't know, it's almost like if there's an ice sculpture or a sculpture, you're chipping away so that you can see what's underneath. It's like chipping away all this like crap that has been now built up over the past however many years to really get at who we truly are. And it's a tall task. I'm not here to say that like this is going to be easy or, whatever, but I want to do my part, and other people will tackle it a different way, I'm an optimist, so.
I want to get your take on something that one of our regular guests talked about recently. His name is Seth Maskett. He's a political science professor who writes books about presidential races. His belief is that this was a change election and Democrats basically had no chance at winning probably. What's your reaction to that?
He could be right. First of all, most elections are change elections, to be honest, unless the incumbent is like carrying on. But I think deeper than that, I'm blessed to have some of this data behind me with Ipsos, and Ipsos is a gigantic company. Okay, it's based in France. We're in 80 countries around the world.
Wow.
We do research like all over the world, and our public affairs division showed us. It was like this chart, and I'll never forget it. So at the 40% approval rating for any president, and this is globally, okay, there's a lot of US elections in this data, but like globally, okay, we're talking about all around the world. If a president is at a 40% approval rating, the successor has a 1 in 8 chance of winning. Like,
wow.
Low, okay?
Yeah.
Biden was at 37, okay? So already, I mean, it would have been historically, and I mean, this data is looking across many years, across many countries. I mean, it would have been a huge feat for anyone, like, coming into those shoes, right? You couple on top of that, most people in the U.S. thought that we were going in the wrong direction. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Other, it was an uphill battle for anybody. And I do believe, given those data points, the message should or could have been more about change, right? More about here we are today, right? This is what we need to do today. She she butted on that with like a new generation of leadership, but it didn't go much further than that, right? Like, how am I going to see change? Trump feels like change to the people, believe it or not, like to the people.
Yeah, I mean, he's definitely changed.
And there's reasons to believe that, like, like his cabinet picks, for whatever you think of them, they're change, right?
Yes, they are.
Yeah, they certainly are a change.
Yeah. So, he turned out to be the change candidate. I think your guest is onto something there. I think it's a big deal.
So we talked about this a little bit, but I want to see if you have any further insights. Part of, I think, the problem is, like, let's say when you were on The Apprentice and 20 million people a week were watching that show, there really isn't anything like that anymore. And I think this has to do a lot with social media, that people are just, like, bifurcating into these, like, tiny little silos, like we talked about, and only getting the things they already believe fed back to them. Do you have any, like, data or, conclusions drawn on the effect that social media has on even the ability to, like, heal a divided nation?
I don't have any data on that. I just know when I look at the data with Ipsos, I can very clear, like, it's so clear. Like, if you take, we have thousands of people, let's say, in a poll, and you take, I don't know, 800 people that watch, we'll call it liberal-leaning media, and 800 people who watch conservative-leaning media, and then you look at how they've answered all of the questions we've asked them, it's 180 degrees. Yeah. It's 180 degrees. So, that would tell me that it's really difficult to sort of keep the silos of media that we have and sort of heal the divide unless we bring something new to it. When I did Behind the Glass, and this was, the one that I talked about was actually in 2016, so a long time ago at this point. But when I put it on Facebook, because that was the platform that was cool at that time, the first clip got 1.5 million views instantly, okay? Which was crazy. But what was more interesting to me is the algorithm didn't know what side the content was on. So I was getting people who were supporting the Trump supporters, and I was getting people who were supporting the undocumented immigrants, which you would, qualify as maybe more on the liberal side. And there was dialogue happening even in the comments of the posts that you don't typically see. So I think if you create content and you put it in a place where it has the opportunity to sort of get both audiences, there is a way to do that. The challenge now is there's not a lot of places that get both audiences anymore. Right? So then you have to sort of go to each, right? And sort of do it separately, but, bring it together in the end. So it's just a little bit more challenging now than it was back then.
So if people want to find your work and follow your, neurometrics and the other interviews you're going to do, where can they find you?
Yeah, the biggest place is YouTube. That's where I'm kind of posting all my most current content. And it's such a little baby channel. Like, I mean, I just started it, and I had to like Google how do you post on YouTube, and that's where that's where I was at.
I think everyone does that though.
and I think I'm doing an all right job. Like I think I'm up to like almost 700 subscribers. I would love to get to like 1,000. It's a baby channel, but yeah, if you want to go there, and it's just my name, Elizabeth Jarosz, and Jarosz is how you spell it. So Elizabeth Jarosz on YouTube. That would be like the number one place. I have a website, behindtheglass.tv, where you can sign up for a newsletter. So that's another way to kind of get updated on some of the stuff I'm doing. And of course I'm on like Facebook and Instagram and TikTok and all that with my name. But those are the two places that I think people would like to go first.
Well, we started what we thought was an audio thing 5 years ago, and now we had to start putting on YouTube also. So we were also Googling how to post on YouTube a couple weeks ago. So, find her at Elizabeth Jarosz on YouTube and behindtheglass.tv, and just Google her and follow her around. Elizabeth, it has been really awesome to talk to you today. We really appreciate you coming on the Get More Smarter podcast. Thank you so much.
Oh, it was my honor. I mean, you guys feel like, the real experts. I just do the research. So it was nice to be here and talk to you.
Well, we fooled somebody at least.